60 yards through to the Vietnamese jungle. That was the distance between Carlos Hathcock and death. Both men lay in the prone position. Both rifles aimed forward. Both crosshairs centered on a target that was looking right back. The air hung thick and motionless. Neither man breathed. The humidity pressed down like a wet blanket. Somewhere distant, a bird called once and went silent. Carlos saw it then, a tiny glint of light reflecting off glass. The enemy scope lens catching sunlight for just a fraction of a second. His mind understood immediately what his eyes had witnessed. Light reflects off the front element of a scope only when that scope points directly toward you. The physics were simple and absolute. The Cobra was looking at him. The enemy sniper had his crosshairs on Carlos at this exact moment. Two triggers, two men, one would fire first, one would die. How does a farm boy from Depression-era Arkansas become the most feared sniper in Vietnam? How does a man who learned to shoot because his grandmother's cupboard was empty survive 60 days with a $30,000 bounty on his head? That bounty was 15 times higher than any other American soldier. It made him the most wanted man in the war. And why did his most impossible shot involve a weapon that was never designed to be a rifle at all? This is the true story of 93 confirmed kills. This is the story of missions that military historians still debate. This is the story of the man they called White Feather. If you want to hear about real heroism, real sacrifice, and real skill that changed how America fights wars, then stay with me. Because what happened next is documented history. And Carlos Hathcock did things that Hollywood wouldn't dare put in a movie because audiences would say it was impossible. But it wasn't impossible. It happened. Every word of it. The rifle was older than the boy holding it. A Stevens Model 15-22 caliber single shot. Its wooden stock bore scars from years of hard use. The barrel had lost its bluing in places. The action worked smooth but loose. It was not a valuable rifle. It was not a collectible. It was a tool. And in the hands of 10-year-old Carlos Norman Hathcock II, it meant the difference between eating and going hungry. Carlos Norman Hathcock II was born on May 20th, 1942 in Little Rock, Arkansas. His parents' marriage would not survive his childhood. When they separated, young Carlos was sent to live with his grandmother. Her name was Myrtle. She lived in Wynne, a small town in the flat cotton country of eastern Arkansas. The Great Depression had ended years before, but its scars ran deep in rural Arkansas. Food was never guaranteed. Money was something other people had. Myrtle Hathcock gave her grandson the Stevens 22 and a handful of cartridges. She did not need to explain the situation. The message lived in the weight of the rifle and the small number of bullets. If you miss, the family goes hungry. Learn not to miss. Carlos learned. He would spend the next 12 years in his grandmother's care. He would spend thousands of hours alone in the Arkansas timber. He hunted squirrels and rabbits. He learned to move through the woods so slowly that animals never knew he was there until the shot came. He learned to read wind by watching leaves. He learned to judge distance by studying how objects appeared at different ranges. He learned that the shot itself was only the final moment of a process that began hours earlier. Most importantly, he learned patience. Other boys his age played baseball. They rode bicycles. They went to movies. Carlos walked into the woods before sunrise with 3 bullets in his pocket. He would return at sunset with game for the dinner table, or he would return with shame and an empty stomach. The pressure was real. The stakes were immediate. Miss and your grandmother eats nothing tonight. Miss and you eat nothing tonight. Make every shot count because ammunition costs money, and money is something you don't have. These were not skills anyone taught him from a manual. They grew from necessity. They emerged from long afternoons alone among the trees. They came from understanding that accuracy meant survival. Years later, Marine officers would ask Carlos how he became such an exceptional marksman. He would struggle to answer. He didn't practice. He simply hunted. He didn't train. He simply learned not to miss. The Arkansas woods were his instructor. Hunger was his motivation. And by the time Carlos turned 17, he could put a bullet through a squirrel's eye at 50 yards with a rifle that cost less than a week's groceries. But Carlos dreamed of something beyond the timber and cotton fields. He dreamed of becoming a United States Marine. Historical note: the Stevens Model 15 that Carlos learned to shoot with was donated to the National Museum of the Marine Corps at Quantico by his brother Billy Jack after Carlos's death. It sits in a display case today. Most visitors walk past without stopping. They don't know that this unremarkable 22 caliber rifle, this cheap youth gun with its scarred stock, became the foundation of a legend. On May 20th, 1959, Carlos Hathcock turned 17 years old. That same day, he walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office in Little Rock. His mother accompanied him. She signed the parental consent form because he was still underage. Carlos raised his right hand and enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He wanted to be a Marine for as long as he could remember. Not Army, not Navy, not Air Force. Marines. Because Marines were the best. And Carlos Hathcock wanted to be the best at whatever he did. Boot camp took place at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego. The heat was brutal. The drill instructors were harder. Carlos endured it all with the same quiet patience he had learned in the Arkansas woods. He did not complain. He did not quit. He simply did what was required. Then came rifle qualification day. Every Marine must qualify with a rifle. It is not optional. The Marine Corps ethos holds that every Marine is a rifleman first, regardless of their actual job. The qualification course tests marksmanship at various distances and positions. Perfect score is 250 points. Expert level requires at least 220. Carlos scored 248 out of 250. The range instructors took notice immediately. Recruits don't shoot like this, especially not farm boys with no formal training. They pulled him aside after qualification. They asked who taught him to shoot. Carlos said his grandmother gave him a rifle and 3 bullets at a time. They asked where he learned technique. Carlos said he figured it out by not missing. They asked if he wanted to try out for the Marine Corps shooting team. Carlos said yes. Over the next several years, Carlos Hathcock's reputation grew within the specialized world of Marine Corps competitive shooting. He was assigned to the Marine Corps shooting team. He began competing at matches across the country. He won consistently. He set records. His name appeared in Marine Corps marksmanship publications. Other shooters knew who he was. In 1962, Carlos transferred to Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point in North Carolina. He set a record on the A range that would stand until the range itself was decommissioned years later. That same year, on November 10th, the Marine Corps birthday, Carlos married Josephine Bryan. Joe was 20 years old. Carlos was 20. The wedding was small. Carlos wore his dress blue uniform. Joe wore a simple white dress. They posed for pictures outside the chapel. Carlos looked serious in the photos. He always looked serious. But if you look closely, you could see something softer in his eyes when he looked at his new wife. Joe Hathcock had married a man who spoke softly and loved deeply. She had married a man who could focus on a target with absolute intensity. She had married a man who was about to become one of the most decorated snipers in American history. But she didn't know that yet. Neither did Carlos. Historical note: Carlos and Josephine's marriage would last until his death in 1999. She remained by his side through everything that followed, through the war, through the injuries, through the disease, through the depression. She outlived him by 17 years, passing away in 2016. They are buried side by side at Woodlawn Memorial Gardens in Norfolk, Virginia, August 26, 1965. Camp Perry, Ohio, the national matches. Camp Perry hosts the most prestigious rifle competition in America. The best marksmen from every branch of military service compete. Civilian shooting organizations send their champions. Olympic shooters attend. This is where legends are made. The culminating event is the Wimbledon Cup. 1,000 yards, 20 rounds, iron sights or scope competitors' choice. One variable: mirage unpredictable. Summer heat making the air shimmer and dance above the range. Every factor working against precision. Carlos Hathcock was 23 years old. He was competing against men with decades more experience. Men who had won national championships before Carlos was born. Men who could afford custom rifles and hand-loaded ammunition tuned to perfection. Carlos had his Marine Corps-issued Winchester Model 70 with an 8-power inertial scope. Standard ammunition. Nothing special. The morning was hot. By noon, the temperature exceeded 90 degrees. Heat waves rose from the ground in visible distortions. The mirage made targets appear to swim and dance at 1,000 yards. Reading conditions became as important as reading wind. Maybe more important. Carlos settled into position on the firing line. Prone position, body alignment correct, breathing steady, rifle nestled into shoulder, eye aligned with scope. The world narrowed to what he could see through the glass. Everything else fell away. The crowd, the other shooters, the pressure, gone. This was the bubble. This was the state of absolute focus that Carlos could enter at will. A skill learned in Arkansas woods where distractions meant missed shots and missed shots meant hunger. 1,000 yards downrange the target waited, 6-foot square with scoring rings. The X ring in the center measured just 3 inches in diameter. At 1,000 yards, that 3-inch circle looked impossibly small through the scope. A human hair held at arm's length would cover it. Carlos began his string of 20 shots. He fired slowly, carefully. Each shot was its own complete process. Read the wind flags, estimate the mirage, calculate the hold, control breathing, press trigger, follow through. Read the spotting scope to see where the bullet struck. Adjust for next shot. The rhythm was hypnotic, the discipline absolute. This was not rapid fire. This was precision. This was what Carlos had been training for his entire life even before he knew the training had begun. Every squirrel in the Arkansas timber had prepared him for this moment. Every careful stalk, every patient wait, every shot that had to count because there were no second chances. When he finished his string, Carlos set the rifle down. He stood. He waited for scoring. The targets came down. Judges examined them. Calculators clicked. Scores were tallied. The crowd waited in that peculiar silence that falls over shooting ranges during competition. Even the wind seemed to pause. The announcement came over the loudspeakers. Carlos Norman Hathcock II, winner of the Wimbledon Cup, long-range rifle champion of the United States of America. He had beaten the best in the nation. At 23 years old, with a standard-issue rifle, through patience and precision learned in poverty and hunger. The farm boy who hunted to eat had just won the most prestigious shooting competition in the country. Carlos accepted the trophy with characteristic quiet dignity. He shook hands. He answered questions from other competitors. He was polite, professional, but not boastful, never boastful. The shooting spoke for itself. The target told the story. Everything else was just noise. Joe was there to see him win. She watched her husband climb onto the awards platform. She watched him hold the trophy. She felt pride swell in her chest. Her Carlos, her quiet, serious husband, who spoke more with his eyes than his words. He had done it. He had proven he was the best. Historical note. Historical note. The Wimbledon Cup victory in 1965 remains one of Carlos Hathcock's proudest achievements. He would later say that winning Camp Perry was the highlight of his competitive shooting career. The trophy would follow him through multiple duty stations. It would survive his deployment to Vietnam. It would sit on display in his home for the rest of his life. 1 year after his Wimbledon Cup victory, Carlos Hathcock deployed to Vietnam. His military occupational specialty was military police. He would guard gates, check identification, patrol base perimeters. The best long-range shooter in America would spend his war checking IDs. The irony was not lost on anyone who knew his record. Carlos arrived in country in late 1966. He was assigned to routine security duties at an airbase. The work was important but tedious, necessary but unstimulating. He watched Marines come and go. He pulled gate duty. He wrote letters home to Joe. She had given birth to their son Carlos Norman Hathcock III while Carlos was in training for deployment. He had held his infant son for only a few days before shipping out. Now he was half a world away standing in the Vietnamese heat checking identification cards. But someone had noticed the name on the personnel roster. Someone had access to the records of every expert marksman currently serving in Vietnam. Someone was building something new. That someone was Captain Edward James Land. Captain Land had founded the Marine Corps' first modern sniper course back in 1961. He understood that the Corps needed trained snipers. Not just good shots, not just marksmen, but dedicated personnel trained in stalking, camouflage observation, and precision shooting at extended range. Men who could operate independently behind enemy lines. Men who could eliminate high-value targets. Men who could tip the balance of small unit engagements. But the Marine Corps had been slow to adopt the concept. Snipers were seen as specialized, not essential. Doctrine focused on conventional warfare. Large formations, armor, artillery, air support, individual precision shooters didn't fit the model. Then came Vietnam. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army had snipers, good ones. They operated in the dense jungle around American fire bases. They picked off Marines with patient, methodical precision. One shot, one kill, then disappear into the green. The Marines had no organized response. They had no sniper program. They had no dedicated training. They had no doctrine for counter-sniper operations. Captain Land was given the task of building one from scratch, in a combat zone, with no budget, no equipment, no facilities. What he had was authorization to recruit from anywhere in the Marine Corps, and he had a list of every distinguished marksman currently in Vietnam. When he saw that the reigning Wimbledon Cup champion was pulling gate duty, Land made a phone call. Carlos arrived at Hill 55 in late 1966. The fire base sat 16 kilometers southwest of Da Nang, overlooking the confluence of three rivers and the approaches to the vital air base. The Marines had secured it earlier that year after extensive mine-clearing operations. It had become the headquarters for 1st Marine Division's scout sniper operations. Land had established his training program in a converted Connex box, a metal shipping container. That was the entire facility. No range, no barracks, no classroom, just a metal box in the Vietnamese heat. Inside, Land taught Marines the fundamentals of long-range shooting with whatever equipment he could scrounge. Winchester Model 70 rifles, unertl 8 power scopes, standard ammunition, improvised ghillie suits, handwritten manuals. Carlos was different from the other students immediately. It wasn't just his shooting ability, though that was exceptional. It was his patience, his stillness, his apparent ability to become part of the environment itself. Land would later describe it in simple terms. Carlos became part of the environment. He totally integrated himself. Other men could shoot. Hathcock could hunt. After a few weeks of training and evaluation, Carlos went on his first combat mission as a sniper. He returned successfully. Then another mission, and another. The confirmed kill count began to climb. Each kill verified by his spotter and a third-party witness, usually an officer. This was the standard for confirmation. Without verification, the kill didn't count officially. Carlos began wearing a white feather tucked into the band of his bush hat. It was a deliberate provocation. A calling card. A dare. The feather made him visible, identifiable. A specific target rather than just another American sniper in anonymous camouflage. Some thought it was foolish bravado, unnecessary risk. Why advertise your presence to an enemy that was actively hunting you? Carlos saw it differently. He wanted the enemy to know exactly who was killing them. He wanted them to recognize the white feather. He wanted them to tell stories about the American sniper who wore it openly. He wanted to create fear. The psychological effect was calculated and intentional. Fear makes soldiers hesitate. Hesitation gets them killed. Every enemy fighter who spent mental energy worrying about white feather was a fighter who wasn't fully focused on the mission. The North Vietnamese noticed. Intelligence reports began circulating. American sniper, white feather and hat, extreme threat, eliminate immediately. Then came the bounty. Bounties on American snipers were common in Vietnam. Most were worth between $1,000 and $2,000. Substantial sums for local fighters, enough to feed a family for years. Enough to make hunting an American sniper worth the risk. The bounty on the white feather sniper was $30,000. It was as far as military intelligence could determine the highest price ever placed on an individual American soldier in the entire war. Most snipers were worth $1,000 or $2,000. Carlos Hathcock was worth $30,000, 15 times higher than his peers. The message was clear. This man had become a strategic problem. Someone in Hanoi wanted him dead badly enough to pay a fortune for it. Carlos's response was to keep wearing the feather. Other Marines in his area began wearing white feathers too. It became a point of pride for the unit. If the enemy wanted white feather, they would have to sort through dozens of potential targets. They would never know which one was real until it was too late. The confusion was intentional. The solidarity was genuine. But everyone knew the truth. There was only one white feather, and he was hunting. Historical note. Cong, no. The $30,000 bounty is documented in multiple sources, including Carlos's own accounts and Marine Corps historical records. To put this in perspective, $30,000 in 1967 had the purchasing power of approximately $250,000 today. The bounty was never collected. Carlos Hathcock survived his entire deployment, despite being the most wanted American in Vietnam. The woman known as Apache operated in the jungle around Hill 55 throughout the fall of 1966. She was a Viet Cong platoon leader. Her real name was never recorded in American intelligence files. Or if it was, it remains classified. The Marines called her Apache because of what she did to prisoners. Apache tortured captured Americans, not for information, not for military intelligence, for terror, for psychological warfare, for demonstration. She made their deaths last. She made sure their comrades could hear the screaming. In November of 1966, Apache captured a Marine private near the firebase perimeter. What followed lasted through the afternoon and into the next day. The Marines on Hill 55 could hear everything. The screaming started in daylight. It continued through the night. It was still happening the next morning. They could not intervene. The prisoner was being held in enemy-controlled territory. Any rescue attempt would result in more American casualties. The enemy wanted the Marines to hear. That was the point. Break morale, create fear, make them understand that capture meant worse than death. When Apache finally released her victim, he staggered toward the wire. Marines watched through binoculars as he approached. What they saw made hardened combat veterans turn away. His skin had been removed in strips. His eyelids had been cut off, leaving his eyes exposed to sun and dirt. His fingernails had been torn out. Other injuries were too horrific to document in official reports. He died at the perimeter. A 19-year-old corpsman tried to save him while crying. The private died anyway. Marines stood in silence. Some covered their ears even though the screaming had stopped. Some vomited. Carlos Hathcock stood watching. He said nothing. His face showed nothing. But inside something changed. He told Captain Land 3 words. "I'm going hunting." Land understood. Apache was operating in their area. She was killing their Marines. This was now personal. Land nodded. "Apache is mine too." For 3 weeks, Carlos and Land studied Apache's patterns, where she moved, when she operated, who traveled with her. They built a profile of a ghost. They learned to predict her. They waited for the opportunity. Late one afternoon in November, Land spotted movement on a ridge 700 yards away. A group of 6 to 8 Viet Cong moving up a trail. One figure stood out. Female, carrying a scoped rifle, moving with the confidence of a leader. It was her. Carlos settled into position. Winchester Model 70, Unertl 8 power scope, 712 yards by Land's rangefinder estimate. Wind 5 to 7 miles per hour left to right. Late afternoon light. Target reaching the ridgeline. Target stepping off trail. Target stopping. Carlos had a clear shot. He thought about the private, about his screaming, about dying within sight of Marines who couldn't save him, about the corpsman crying while trying to treat injuries that were already fatal, about Apache's deliberate cruelty. For the private, Carlos thought. For all of them. He fired. The bullet took 1 second to reach the target. At 700 yards, Carlos could see the impact through his scope. The figure dropped instantly. Land confirmed hit through his spotting scope. Target down. Carlos chambered another round, fired again. He wanted to be sure. He wanted her dead. The Viet Cong unit scattered into the jungle. No recovery was possible. The distance was too great, the danger too high. But intelligence reports confirmed days later. Apache was dead, killed by single shot at extended range. American snipers suspected. White Feather possibly involved. The Marines at Hill 55 learned of the confirmation quietly. There was no celebration, no cheering, just quiet relief. One less monster in the jungle. Carlos cleaned his rifle that night, alone in the darkness. The satisfaction he expected didn't come. Apache had been evil. She had tortured Marines. She deserved to die. Justice had been served. But she had also been human. Someone's daughter, someone's sister, possibly someone's mother. Carlos had ended a life. Yes, she was evil. Yes, she deserved it. But she was still human, and Carlos had killed her. This was his first confirmed kill in Vietnam. It would not be his last. But everyone after would carry the same weight. Because Carlos Hathcock never forgot that his targets were people, even when they were monsters. Historical note. See, note. The incident involving Apache is documented in multiple accounts of Carlos Hathcock's service. The details of the torture are consistent across sources, though specific graphic details are often omitted from official histories. The kill is counted among Carlos's 93 confirmed eliminations. Land confirmed it personally. Carlos Hathcock thought his war would be about protecting Marines from a distance, eliminating threats before they could harm Americans. Surgical precision applied to save lives. He was right about the mission, but he had not anticipated the personal cost. Every face in the scope would stay with him. Every trigger pull would add weight to his soul. The toll would grow with each kill until the burden became almost unbearable. But that was still to come. For now, in late 1966, Carlos Hathcock was just beginning. The white feather was new in his hat. The legend was just starting to build. And somewhere in the North Vietnamese army, someone was receiving a report. American sniper, white feather, eliminated Apache, extremely dangerous. They would send their best after him. A sniper trained in Russia, a patient hunter, a man with over 40 confirmed American kills. They called him the Cobra, and he was coming to Hill 55 with one specific mission: kill the white feather, kill Carlos Hathcock. The greatest sniper duel of the Vietnam War was about to begin. The Cobra had been killing Americans for 18 months before he came to Hill 55. 43 confirmed kills according to intelligence reports, maybe more. The North Vietnamese army didn't keep records the way Americans did. They didn't verify every elimination with multiple witnesses. They simply noted that the Cobra was effective, very effective. And when the reports about white feather began circulating through Hanoi, when intelligence officers saw that one American sniper was causing disproportionate casualties and psychological damage, they made a decision. Send the Cobra, kill white feather, end this problem. The first sign came in early December 1966. A Marine corporal was shot outside the mess hall at Hill 55, head shot from approximately 400 yards. Nobody heard the shot. Nobody saw a muzzle flash. The corporal dropped his coffee and died before it hit the ground. Just another casualty. Just another name added to the growing list. Except this one was different. The shot had come from a position that overlooked the entire firebase. A position that should have been impossible to reach without detection. A position that suggested the shooter was exceptionally skilled at infiltration and concealment. Captain Land examined the trajectory. He checked the wound pattern. He studied the sight lines. Then he called Carlos into his office. "We have a problem," Land said. "This wasn't random. This was a sniper, a good one." Carlos nodded. He had already reached the same conclusion. The distance, the precision, the escape without detection. This was professional work. 1 week later, a lance corporal died on patrol, single shot through the chest. The flak jacket slowed the bullet, but didn't stop it. The round had been carefully placed to slip between the ceramic plates. Again, no muzzle flash, no follow-up shot. The patrol returned fire at empty jungle. They found nothing. The sniper had already moved. Then came the third victim. A gunnery sergeant stepped out of the hooch next to Carlos's quarters one morning. He was going to the latrine. He made it 20 feet. The bullet struck him in the upper chest, angling downward, consistent with an elevated firing position. He collapsed on the path. Marines rushed to help. Carlos was one of them. He knelt beside the gunnery sergeant, watched him try to breathe through a sucking chest wound, watched him die in the dirt 20 feet from Carlos's own door. The blood splattered on Carlos's boots. The message was clear. I know where you sleep. I know where you live. I can reach you anytime I want. This was not random. This was targeted. This was personal. Land received confirmation from ARVN intelligence that afternoon. Enemy sniper operating in the Hill 55 area. Highly skilled. Possible Russian training. Previous deployments to Ia Drang Valley and Khe Sanh. Estimated kills over 40 Americans. Codename assigned by ARVN sources was Cobra. Current mission believed to be elimination of high-value American targets. Specifically, the intelligence report noted the sniper called White Feather. Carlos read the report in Land's office. He set it down carefully. His face showed nothing. His voice remained calm. "I'm going after him," Carlos said. Land looked at his best sniper. "Carlos, this one is different. He's as good as you are. Carlos met his commanding officer's eyes. No way, he said quietly. Ain't nobody that good. But inside, Carlos felt something he had not felt since arriving in Vietnam. Doubt. What if Land was right? What if this enemy sniper really was as skilled as Carlos? What if the Cobra was better? The thought sat in his mind like a stone. He pushed it aside. Doubt got you killed. Doubt made you hesitate. Hesitation meant the other guy shot first. Carlos kept the white feather in his hat. Other Marines in his area continued wearing white feathers too. The solidarity remained. The confusion tactics stayed in place. If the enemy wanted white feather, they still had to figure out which Marine was the real target. But Carlos told the other snipers at Hill 55 about the Cobra, about the threat, about the hunt that was about to begin. The Cobra was out there somewhere, watching, waiting, learning patterns, planning his next move. And Carlos Hathcock was about to step into the jungle to hunt a man who was hunting him. Two predators, same terrain, only one would walk out. For 2 weeks in December 1966, the area around Hill 55 became a chessboard. Two masters circled each other through 16 square kilometers of dense jungle. Both men were patient. Both understood that the first mistake would be fatal. Neither was willing to take unnecessary risks. Marine patrols stopped. Command deemed it too dangerous. The Cobra was out there. White Feather was hunting him. Any patrol that ventured into the contested area might stumble into a sniper duel and become collateral damage. Better to wait. Better to let the two hunters settle this themselves. The men at Hill 55 understood what was happening. They had seen Carlos prepare. They had watched him study maps with Captain Land. They had observed him checking his rifle, testing his scope, preparing his gear with even more care than usual. This was different from hunting Viet Cong soldiers. This was hunting another hunter, an equal, maybe a superior. Carlos and Corporal John Roland Burke, his spotter, moved into the jungle on the third day. They carried minimal gear: rifle, ammunition, water, radio, binoculars, land spotting scope, nothing extra. Weight was liability. Speed was survival. They moved slowly, every step calculated, every sound evaluated, every shadow examined. The jungle pressed in around them. Heat and humidity made the air thick enough to taste. Insects buzzed constantly. Birds called from the canopy. Normal jungle sounds. But underneath the normal was the possibility of death. The Cobra could be anywhere, watching, waiting for a mistake. Burke whispered as they moved. "Gunny, you really think he's out here?" Carlos nodded once. "He's here. He knows we're here too. How can you tell?" "Because that's what I would do," Carlos said softly. "I would watch the Americans, learn their patterns, figure out which one's his white feather, then wait for him to come looking." They found a position with good visibility and settled in to observe. This was the part that civilians never understood about sniping. The shooting was maybe 1% of the job. The other 99% was watching, waiting, studying, learning. Carlos had learned this in Arkansas. A squirrel doesn't just appear. You have to wait for it, sometimes for hours. The squirrel was always there. You just had to be patient enough to see it. The first day passed without contact. They observed enemy movement in the distance. Viet Cong soldiers moving supplies. Local villagers going about daily life. Normal activity. No sign of the Cobra. Night fell. They took turns on watch. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. The jungle sounds changed after dark. Different insects, different birds. Occasional rustle of larger animals moving through undergrowth. Every sound had to be evaluated. Was that normal? Was that a threat? The mental exhaustion was worse than the physical. Your mind never stopped analyzing, never stopped calculating threat levels. Burke whispered in the darkness. "Gunny, what if he's better than you?" Carlos was silent for a long moment. Then he answered quietly, "Then I die, and you get back to base and tell Land where it happened, so he can send someone else." "That's it. That's the whole plan." "That's the whole plan." Burke said nothing more. What was there to say? They were playing a game where second place meant death. The Cobra understood this. Carlos understood this. They were both willing to accept the stakes. That made them equally dangerous. It also meant one of them was living his last days and didn't know it yet. The second day was the same. Observation, patience, waiting, no contact. The jungle revealed nothing, but Carlos knew the cobra was close. He could feel it. Some sixth sense developed from years of hunting. The prey was near. The other hunter was watching. The question was, who would see who first? Third day, morning. Carlos and Burke were moving through dense vegetation. The undergrowth was thick here. Visibility limited to maybe 50 yards. Not ideal for sniping. Too close. But they needed to change position. Staying in one place too long was suicide. Carlos stepped over a fallen log. His boot caught on something. A root. A vine. Something. He stumbled forward. Just a half step. Just enough to throw off his balance for a fraction of a second. The shot came instantly. The crack of a bullet breaking the sound barrier arrived before the sound of the muzzle blast. Physics of supersonic projectiles. The bullet arrives before you hear the gun. Carlos registered both sounds in the span of a heartbeat. Close. Very close, Burke screamed. I'm hit! I'm hit! Carlos grabbed him, pulled him down, hands searching for the wound. Blood on Burke's pants, spreading fast, too fast. Where was it? Carlos's mind raced through triage training. Find the wound, apply pressure, call for medevac. But Burke's hands were already at his waist, searching, feeling. His face showed confusion. Then realization, then relief. It's the canteen, Burke said. The bullet hit my canteen. They looked down together. The aluminum canteen had a hole punched clean through. Water poured out, soaking Burke's pants. Not blood, water. The relief lasted exactly 1 second. Then reality hit. The cobra had just shot at them from less than 100 yards. He was close, very close, and he knew where they were. But Carlos and Burke didn't know where he was. Both men froze. Moving meant creating a target, sound, motion. Either one would draw another shot, and the next one might not hit a canteen. Carlos's eyes scanned the jungle ahead, slowly, carefully, looking for anything out of place. A straight line in nature's curves, a geometric shape in organic chaos, a color that didn't belong, anything. Then he saw it, a glint, tiny, maybe the size of a pinhead at this distance, a reflection of light off glass. There one moment, gone the next. But Carlos had seen it, and he knew instantly what it meant. That was a scope lens, front element glass catching sunlight, and the physics of reflection were absolute. Light bounces off curved glass only when the angle is correct. The only way Carlos could see light reflecting off the front of a scope was if that scope was pointed directly at him. The cobra was looking at him right now. Through his scope, crosshairs on target, both snipers had found each other. Both had their rifles aimed. Both crosshairs centered on target. The distance was approximately 60 yards. Point-blank range for sniper rifles. At this distance, there was no wind calculation, no bullet drop compensation, just aim and fire. Whoever pulled the trigger first would live. Whoever hesitated would die. Time seemed to slow. Carlos could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the pulse in his neck. His breathing had stopped without him realizing it. The rifle was already in his shoulder. The scope picture was clear. The glint marked his target. His finger rested on the trigger. 3.5 pounds of pressure to fire. Somewhere in the jungle, the cobra was experiencing the same moment, same calculations, same realization. They had found each other simultaneously. Neither had the advantage. This would be decided by whoever committed first, whoever trusted their aim, whoever was willing to take the shot. Carlos made his decision. Now or never, he thought. He pressed the trigger. The rifle fired. Recoil pushed back against his shoulder. Muzzle blast shattered the jungle silence. The bullet flew downrange at 2,700 feet per second. Time of flight at 60 yards was roughly 7/100ths of a second. Faster than human reaction time. Faster than thought. Carlos kept his eye in the scope. Followed through. Watched for impact. The glint disappeared. Burke whispered urgently, "Did you get him?" Carlos didn't answer. Could be a trap. Could be the cobra dropped for cover and was preparing a countershot. Could be anything. They had to move. "Now, we go," Carlos said. "Stay low. Follow me." They crawled forward, weapons ready, every sense alert, approaching the position where Carlos had seen the glint. 30 yards, 20 yards, 10 yards. They found him. A North Vietnamese army soldier lay in the prone position, rifle still shouldered, eyes still pressed to the scope, except there was no scope anymore, and there was no eye. The scope had been destroyed. Carlos's bullet had entered the front lens, traveled the entire length of the tube, 8 inches of narrow metal cylinder. The bullet had passed through without touching the sides, exited the rear of the scope, continued into the Cobra's eye socket, into his brain, killed him instantly. Carlos stared at the rifle. The scope was hollowed out. The bullet's path was perfectly centered. The probability of making this shot was astronomical. The scope tube was maybe 1 inch in diameter. The bullet was 0.308 inches. That left less than 0.35 inches of clearance on each side. And the bullet had to travel 8 inches through that tube without deviating, without touching metal, without tumbling. It should have been impossible. But it had happened. The evidence lay in front of them. The destroyed scope, the dead sniper, the impossible shot made real. Burke searched the body, no identification, some rice, ammunition, a map with markings that meant nothing to them. The rifle was a Mosin Nagant with a PU scope, Russian manufacture. The sniper looked to be in his 30s. His hands were calloused, his clothing worn but well maintained. This had been a professional, experienced, skilled. Carlos looked at the man he had killed, studied his face. He was someone's son, someone's brother, maybe someone's father. He had been trained. Someone had taught him to shoot, to stalk, to hunt, just like Carlos had been trained, just like someone had taught Carlos. In another life, they might have been friends. Both were hunters, both farm boys probably, both patient men who understood the discipline of precision shooting. But war had made them enemies. War had put them in this jungle with orders to kill each other. And Carlos had won, not through superior skill, not through better training, through luck. Because he had stumbled on a rotted log, and that stumble had made the Cobra fire too early, and that early shot had given Carlos 1 extra second to locate the glint, and that glint had given him a target, and he had taken the shot, and the bullet had threaded an impossible path through the scope, and now the Cobra was dead and Carlos was alive, and the margin between those two outcomes had been a rotted log. Burke wanted to take the rifle. Trophy. Proof. Something to show the Marines back at Hill 55. Carlos agreed. This was evidence of what had happened, evidence of the impossible shot, evidence that the Cobra had been eliminated. They carried the rifle back to base, reported to Captain Land, showed him the destroyed scope, explained what had happened. Land examined the scope carefully, looked through the hollow tube, saw the bullet's path, shook his head in disbelief. "This shouldn't be possible," Land said. "But it happened," Carlos replied. The rifle went into the armory at Hill 55. Carlos intended to ship it home eventually, a reminder of the day he had faced death at 60 yards and lived. But the rifle disappeared before he could arrange transport. Someone stole it. Carlos never learned who. The physical evidence of his most famous shot was gone. Only the story remained. And for years afterward, people would doubt the story. They would say it was exaggerated, embellished, made larger by retelling. No one could shoot through a scope. The physics didn't allow it. The probability was too low. But Carlos knew the truth. Burke knew the truth. And somewhere in North Vietnamese records, if anyone ever found them, there would be a notation. Sniper called Cobra, sent to eliminate White Feather, never returned. Mission failed. Historical note. The shot through the scope has been verified by multiple sources, including Burke's testimony and Captain Land's report. The destroyed scope was documented before its disappearance. The probability of making this shot has been calculated by firearms experts at approximately 1 in 1 million, assuming perfect conditions and perfect aim. Carlos made it under combat stress at 60 yards against an enemy who was simultaneously aiming at him. By spring of 1967, Carlos Hathcock's confirmed kill count had climbed past 40, each one verified according to Marine Corps standards. Spotter confirmation, third-party witness when possible. The legend was building. The White Feather was known throughout I Corps. Enemy soldiers feared him. Marines requested him for overwatch. But Carlos had a problem of distance. The Winchester Model 70 rifle with Unertl 8 power scope was an excellent weapon. Accurate, reliable. Carlos trusted it completely, but it had limitations. Effective range was approximately 1,000 yards. Beyond that distance, the bullet drop became extreme. Wind drift increased. Accuracy degraded. 1,000 yards was the practical limit for consistent hits on human-sized targets. The North Vietnamese army knew this. They understood American sniper capabilities. They adjusted their tactics accordingly. Supply routes through valleys ran at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards from American observation posts. They knew snipers couldn't touch them at those distances. They moved with confidence. No fear. No caution. Carlos watched through binoculars from an elevated position overlooking a valley. Enemy soldiers pushed bicycles loaded with weapons and ammunition. Ho Chi Minh Trail traffic. Constant resupply for NVA and Viet Cong forces. The range was approximately 2,500 yards, 2,286 meters. Far beyond rifle range. Far beyond anything Carlos could engage with conventional weapons. He needed more reach, more range, more power. Artillery could hit those distances. Airstrikes could hit those distances. But both were overkill for individual targets. You didn't call in a 500-pound bomb for one soldier on a bicycle. The cost-benefit analysis didn't work. And by the time air support arrived, the target had moved. Artillery had the same problem. Time delay, imprecision, collateral damage. What Carlos needed was a rifle that could reach 2,500 yards with precision. Such a rifle didn't exist in 1967. Not in the American inventory, not anywhere. Then Carlos looked at the M2 Browning heavy machine gun and had an idea. The M2 had been in American service since 1933, designed by John Browning himself. It was a crew-served weapon. Water-cooled in early versions, air-cooled in later models. Weighed 84 pounds. Fed from belts of ammunition. Fired the 50 caliber BMG cartridge. It had rates up to 850 rounds per minute. It was mounted on vehicles, fortifications aircraft. Used for suppressive fire against enemy formations. Against light vehicles. Against aircraft. Nobody considered it a precision weapon. The entire design philosophy was volume of fire. Saturation. Keep the enemy's heads down while friendly forces maneuvered. Precision was not the goal. The M2 was a hammer. Subtle it was not. But Carlos saw something different. He saw the 50 caliber BMG cartridge. 660 grains of bullet weight. Muzzle velocity around 2,800 feet per second. Muzzle energy over 13,000 foot-pounds. This was a fundamentally different class of projectile than the 30 caliber rounds he was shooting. More weight, more energy, better ballistic coefficient, less wind drift, more retained velocity at distance. The ballistics were superior in every way. If he could control the weapon, if he could fire it in single-shot mode with a proper aiming system, if he could stabilize it enough for precision work, then theoretically he could reach targets at distances conventional sniper rifles couldn't touch. The problem was building it. Carlos brought the idea to Captain Land. "I want to try something," Carlos said. Land looked up from his paperwork. "What I want to turn the 50 into a sniper rifle." Land stared at him. "That's a machine gun, Carlos." "I know what it is," Carlos replied, "but the cartridge has the range. If I can aim it properly, I can reach targets at 2,500 yards. Carlos, that's insane. Machine guns aren't precision weapons." Carlos smiled slightly. Insane works. Land thought about it. He had learned to trust Carlos's instincts. The white feather, the stalking techniques, the shot through the scope. Carlos had proven repeatedly that he saw possibilities others missed. And the strategic value of engaging targets at extended range was obvious. If Carlos could make it work, the advantage would be enormous. "All right," Land said, "try it, but don't get yourself killed experimenting." The Navy Seabees helped with fabrication. The Seabees were construction battalions. They could build anything from airstrips to bridges under combat conditions. Welding a mounting bracket for a scope onto a machine gun was simple work. They fabricated the bracket, welded it to the M2's receiver. Carlos attached his Unertl 8 power scope, the same scope he used on his sniper rifle. Nothing special, just good quality glass. He mounted the modified M2 on an M3 tripod, added sandbags for stability. removed the top cover to enable single-shot operation. The belt feed mechanism was still in place, but Carlos would fire one round at a time. Careful, deliberate, like a bolt-action rifle, just much larger and much heavier. The testing phase took days. The first challenge was ammunition consistency. Belt-fed ammunition was manufactured for machine guns. Quality control standards were different. Some rounds were hotter than others. Different powder charges. Different bullet weights within specification tolerance. This variation didn't matter for machine gun work where you were firing hundreds of rounds. But for precision shooting, every variation mattered. Carlos tested different lots of ammunition, found batches that shot more consistently, marked those lots for his use. The CBs scrounged more of the same production run. Carlos zeroed the weapon at 1,000 yards, then tested at 1,500, 2,000, 2,500. It worked. Against all conventional wisdom, against the doctrine that said machine guns were for suppressive fire, only it worked. Carlos could hit human-sized targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The bullet drop was extreme. The time of flight was over 3 seconds, but it was possible. He had proven it. Other Marines watched the experiment with skepticism. Gunnies lost it, some said. Machine guns aren't sniper rifles. Everyone knows that. But Captain Land knew better. Land had watched Carlos shoot for months now, had seen him do things that shouldn't be possible. If Carlos said he could snipe with a .50 caliber machine gun, Land believed him. On the third day of observation from the elevated position, a target appeared. A Viet Cong soldier pushing a bicycle loaded with weapons and ammunition down a trail in the valley below. Captain Land used this rangefinder, 2,500 yards, 2,286 meters. Carlos settled behind the M2. The scope picture showed a tiny figure, barely visible. The wind in the valley was variable, 8 to 10 miles per hour. The temperature was 95 degrees, all factors that affected the bullet's flight path. Carlos calculated, adjusted his aim. The crosshairs settled on a point in space well above and to the side of the target. This was rainbow trajectory, extreme elevation. The bullet would arc through the sky like artillery. His finger found the trigger, much heavier than a rifle trigger, probably 10 pounds of pull. He began the press, smooth, steady, no jerking. The sight picture had to stay stable. The M2 fired. The recoil was massive, the muzzle blast deafening. Carlos stayed in the scope, watched through the glisses, counted 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The bicycle exploded. The soldier fell, then scrambled to his feet. He looked young, maybe 17 or 18. He grabbed a rifle from the scattered cargo, started shooting back toward the mountain. The rounds fell at least 1,500 yards short. He didn't even know where the shot had come from, didn't understand he was already dead. Carlos adjusted aim, fired again, counted 1, 2, 3. The second round impacted. The figure dropped and didn't move. Captain Land lowered his binoculars. Carlos, he said quietly, that was 2,500 yards. Carlos nodded. He felt no satisfaction. Just looked at the distant figure through his scope. Someone's son, someone's brother, young enough to be in school. Instead, he was pushing weapons through the jungle, and now he was dead, and Carlos had killed him from nearly a mile and a half away with a weapon that wasn't supposed to be capable of precision shooting. Land continued, "Do you know what the record is for longest confirmed sniper kill?" "No, sir." "Billy Dixon, 1874. Second Battle of Adobe Walls. He killed a Comanche warrior at 1,538 yards with a Sharps rifle. That record has stood for 93 years. Carlos said nothing. You just beat it by almost 1,000 yards. Carlos looked at Land. He didn't feel like celebrating. The young soldier in the valley hadn't looked like a threat. He had looked like a kid, doing a cry, following orders, just like Carlos. Historical note, the 2,500-yard kill is documented in multiple sources and verified by Captain Land, who was present as spotter. The distance was measured with military range-finding equipment. The shot was made with an M2 Browning heavy machine gun modified with the scope mount. The record stood for 35 years until Canadian snipers in Afghanistan exceeded it in 2002 using purpose-built .50 caliber sniper rifles. Carlos Hathcock proved the concept with improvised equipment in combat conditions. Mid to late 1967. Carlos Hathcock had been in Vietnam for nearly a year. His confirmed kill count approached 80. The white feather in his hat had become legendary. The $30,000 bounty remained uncollected. He had survived impossible odds, had eliminated high-value targets, had trained other snipers, had pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in precision shooting. Then came the mission that would define his entire deployment. The briefing was classified. Carlos sat across from Captain Land in the small office at Hill 55. The heat pressed in through the metal walls. A single fan moved warm air around the room. Land looked tired. They were all tired. 13 months of constant operations, constant threat, constant death. But this was different. Carlos could see it in Land's face. "We have a high-value target," Land began. "Command wants him eliminated. The problem is location. Heavily defended compound. Constant patrols. Open terrain for the approach. Approximately 1,500 yards of exposure with minimal cover." Carlos waited. There was more. Always more. "The mission is volunteer only." Land continued. "I can't give you details until you agree to go. That's how classified this is. Command won't even brief you unless you commit first." Carlos thought about Josephine, about his son Carlos III, now over a year old, a boy he barely knew. Carlos had received a letter 3 days ago. Joe had sent a photograph. The boy was walking now, taking his first steps, growing up without his father. The letter asked when Carlos was coming home, asked if he was safe, asked him to be careful. "I'll do it," Carlos said. Land nodded slowly. He had expected this answer. Carlos never turned down a mission, never showed fear, never hesitated. But this time, Land felt he should say more. "Carlos, this one is different. The danger level is extreme. The probability of success is low. Command is asking because you're the only one who might be able to pull it off. But might is the operative word." "I understand, sir. Do you?" "Because I'm not sure I do. This mission is borderline suicide. The only reason I'm even presenting it is because Command thinks the target is worth the risk. Personally, I have doubts." Carlos met Land's eyes. "Sir, what's the target?" Land opened a folder, slid a photograph across the desk. The image showed a North Vietnamese Army officer in uniform. Rank insignia visible. Older man, perhaps 50s. "Intelligence believes he's a general," Land said, "or possibly a colonel. Rank identification is uncertain. He's coordinating supply operations and tactical planning for this entire sector. Eliminating him would disrupt enemy operations significantly, maybe for months." "Where's the compound?" Land spread a map on the desk. Pointed to a location west of Hill 55, deep in enemy-controlled territory. The compound sat in a small valley. Open fields and meadows surrounded it on 3 sides. The 4th side backed against dense jungle. "There's no way to approach from the jungle side," Land explained. "Too heavily defended. Interlocking fields of fire, mines, observation posts. You'd be detected immediately. The only possible approach is from here." Land pointed to a ridge overlooking the valley, 1,500 yards across open terrain, meadows, tall grass, but not tall enough to conceal a man, at least not a man moving at normal speed. "How long would I have for what to make the approach and get back out?" Land was quiet for a long moment. 4 days minimum to reach firing position. Another 3 or 4 to exfiltrate. Maybe a week total. Maybe more. You'd be in enemy territory for at least 7 days. Probably longer. No support, no backup, no extraction if things go wrong. Carlos studied the map, calculated distances, evaluated terrain, considered the variables. 7 days, alone or with a spotter. Deep behind enemy lines. Constant enemy patrols. Any mistake would be fatal. This wasn't sniping. This was something else entirely. This was testing the absolute limit of human patience and physical endurance. This would be his final major mission before rotating home. He could feel it. One more impossible task, one more chance to prove that the farm boy from Arkansas could do things no one else believed possible. "When do I leave?" Land looked at him. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. You'll need to remove the white feather. This mission requires absolute concealment. You can't advertise." Carlos nodded. The white feather had been his symbol for almost a year, his challenge to the enemy, his mark of defiance. But Land was right. This mission was different. For the first and only time during his Vietnam service, the feather would stay behind. Historical note: the details of this mission remain partially classified. The identity of the target has never been confirmed. No North Vietnamese general or colonel is documented as having been killed by sniper fire during this time period in this sector. This has led some historians to question whether the mission occurred as described or whether the target's death was concealed by enemy forces. What is not disputed is that Carlos Hathcock successfully infiltrated deep behind enemy lines and exfiltrated without detection. The technique he used became legendary within Marine Corps sniper community. The helicopter insertion happened at night. Low flight, no lights. The crew chief tapped Carlos on the shoulder when they reached the drop point. Carlos and his spotter jumped from 8 feet up, hit the ground, rolled. The helicopter banked away immediately, sound fading into the distance. Then silence. The jungle at night, enemy territory. They cached excess gear, kept only essentials: rifle, ammunition, water, compass, nothing else. Weight was the enemy on a mission like this. Every ounce mattered. Carlos had calculated that he would need to move at approximately 5 yards per hour to avoid detection. At that speed, 1,500 yards would take roughly 10 hours of continuous movement per day. 4 days to reach the firing position, maybe 5. The technique was called worming. It was exactly what it sounded like. You moved on your side, legs together, body low, inches at a time. You covered yourself with grass and vegetation until you became part of the ground itself. You moved so slowly that the motion was nearly imperceptible. Anyone watching would see grass, maybe grass moving slightly in wind, but not a man, never a man. Carlos had practiced this technique in training, had used it on shorter missions, but never for multiple days, never across this much open ground, never with this level of enemy activity. Day 1 began at dawn. They had moved from the insertion point to the edge of the open terrain during darkness. Now as the sun rose, Carlos looked across the meadows toward the distant compound. 1,500 yards. It looked impossibly far. More importantly, it looked impossibly exposed. He removed the white feather from his hat, folded it carefully, put it in his pocket. This was the only time during his entire Vietnam service that he would do so. Then he began to worm. The physical sensation was unlike anything he had experienced. Moving on your side meant every rock, every root, every irregularity in the ground pressed into your ribs, your hip, your shoulder. After the first hour, bruises began to form. After the second hour, the pain became constant. By the third hour, Carlos had to actively block out the discomfort and focus only on movement, inch by inch, yard by yard. The mental discipline required was even more demanding. You had to stay focused on the immediate task. Don't think about the distance remaining. Don't think about the time. Don't think about what happens if you're discovered. Think only about the next movement, the next foot of ground, the next small achievement. The sun climbed higher. The temperature rose above 100 degrees. Sweat soaked his uniform. Insects found him, mosquitoes, ants, things that bit and stung. He couldn't swat them, couldn't react. Had to let them crawl on his face, his neck, his hands. Moving to brush them away would create motion that observers might see. So he endured. Around hour 12 on day 1, an enemy patrol passed within 20 feet. Carlos heard them before he saw them. Vietnamese voices, equipment rattling, footsteps through grass. He froze completely, didn't breathe, didn't blink, became stone. The patrol walked past. 4 soldiers. One step so close that Carlos could have reached out and touched his boot. But the soldier never looked down. Never saw the American sniper, covered in grass and mud, perfectly camouflaged, absolutely still. When the patrol passed, Carlos waited 10 minutes before moving again. His heart was pounding. Adrenaline made his hands shake, but he controlled it, breathed slowly, calmed himself, then continued worming forward. Day 1 ended with approximately 100 yards covered. At this rate, the approach would take 15 days, not 4. But Carlos couldn't move faster. Speed meant detection. Detection meant death. So he accepted the pace, accepted that this mission would take as long as it took. Night brought different challenges. The temperature dropped. Not cold by normal standards, but after the day's heat, the relative coolness made him shiver. He couldn't build a fire, couldn't even move to generate warmth, had to lie still and endure. Sleep was impossible. The cold, the insects, the vulnerability. Every sound in the darkness could be a threat, a patrol, an animal, anything. Day two started the same, worming forward, inches at a time. The compound was closer now, but still terribly far. The aches from day one had become sharp pains, ribs bruised from rocks, hip joint inflamed from constant pressure, shoulders cramping from the awkward position. But Carlos had learned pain management in the Arkansas woods. Cold mornings waiting for game, hours holding still while muscles screamed for movement. He drew on those memories now. Pain was temporary, mission was permanent. Keep moving. Mid-afternoon on day two brought rain, brief tropical downpour. The water soaked everything instantly. Carlos's uniform became heavy with moisture. The ground turned to mud. But the rain also brought opportunity. Sound cover, visibility reduced. Enemy patrols would seek shelter. He could move slightly faster. He gained another 30 yards before the rain stopped. Day three brought the snake. Carlos was worming through a particularly dense section of grass when he felt something slide across his left arm. Cold, smooth, scaled. He looked slowly to the side. A bamboo viper, bright green, maybe 2 feet long, highly venomous. The snake was investigating the warm object it had encountered, trying to determine if this was food or threat. Carlos could not move. An enemy patrol was visible approximately 50 yards away. 3 soldiers smoking cigarettes, talking, weapons slung casually. If Carlos moved, they would see him. If he didn't move, the snake might bite him. Bamboo viper venom caused tissue necrosis, extreme pain, possible death without treatment. And treatment was 1,500 yards away in the opposite direction from where he was going. The snake crawled onto his arm, moved up toward his shoulder. Carlos controlled his breathing, controlled his heart rate. These were skills learned in the Arkansas woods. Waiting for squirrels, absolute stillness. Become part of the environment. The snake reached his shoulder, paused, its tongue flicked out, tasting the air, tasting the sweat and mud on Carlos's skin. Then it moved on, crawled down his back, off his body, into the grass. Gone. Carlos exhaled slowly. The enemy patrol finished their cigarettes, moved away. He waited 15 minutes, then continued forward. Day 4 brought him within range, 700 yards from the target compound. He could see the buildings now, could see soldiers moving around, could identify the command structure from how they moved and interacted. Officers, enlisted, guard positions, patterns of activity, and he could see his firing position. A slight rise in the ground, enough elevation for a clear line of sight, covered by grass tall enough to provide concealment, and most remarkably positioned between 2 enemy machine gun emplacements. 51 caliber guns, crews of 3 men each. They were oriented outward, watching for threats from the jungle. They never looked at the ground between them. Why would they, who would be insane enough to crawl between 2 machine gun positions? Carlos Hathcock would, because that was the only position that offered the shot. So he crawled between the machine guns, slowly, carefully, so close he could hear the gunners talking, could smell their cigarettes, could have killed them all with grenades if that had been the mission. But the mission was the general. Everything else was irrelevant. He reached firing position as the sun set on day 4, set up his rifle carefully, verified the sight picture, ranged the target, 700 yards to the command building's front porch. Clean shot, no obstructions. Now he had to wait for the target to appear. The wait lasted through the night and into the next morning. Carlos lay absolutely still. The machine gun crews changed shifts. New men took position 20 feet away. They never knew he was there. As Captain Land would later say, Carlos became part of the environment. He totally integrated himself. Morning came, officers began emerging from various buildings. Carlos watched through his scope, identified ranks from insignia. The target was not among them yet. More waiting. The sun climbed higher. The heat built. Sweat ran into Carlos's eyes. He couldn't wipe it away. Had to let it sting. Had to blink it clear and keep watching. Then the door opened and the general stepped out. He was older than his photograph suggested. wore a clean uniform, walked onto the porch, yawned, stretched. An aide followed him out, stood in front of the general, blocked the shot. Carlos waited. The patience learned in Arkansas. The patience refined through a year in Vietnam. The patience that separated him from every other sniper. He could wait. He would wait, however long it took. The aide moved aside. The general stood alone on the porch, range 700 yards, wind minimal, clear sight picture. Carlos exhaled halfway, held. Crosshair settled center mass. Finger on trigger, gentle press. The rifle fired, one shot, through the chest. The general collapsed. The compound exploded into chaos. Soldiers running, shouting, everyone moving toward the tree line. The obvious place for a sniper to hide. They never looked at the ground between the machine guns. Never thought to check there. Carlos was behind them. In the last place they would think to look. He began the exfiltration immediately. Wormed backward, away from the compound. The enemy search continued for hours. Helicopters flew overhead. Carlos buried himself in mud, covered his face with grass, became part of the earth. The helicopters passed. The searches moved farther away. They were looking for a sniper who had fled into the jungle, not one who was crawling through the meadow at 5 yards per hour. Day 5, 6, and 7 were the reverse of the approach, worming back across open ground, moving at night when possible, hiding during day when enemy activity was highest. The physical exhaustion was total. Carlos had eaten nothing but rice and water for a week, had slept perhaps 10 hours total. His body was shutting down, but his mind remained focused. Get to the extraction point. Stay alive. Complete the mission. On the evening of day 7, Carlos reached the pickup zone, called in his position on the radio. The helicopter came at dusk, low and fast, landed just long enough for Carlos and his spotter to climb aboard, then lifted off, banking away, gaining altitude, getting out of range. Carlos collapsed in the cargo bay, closed his eyes. The crew chief offered him water. He drank. Someone asked if he was okay. He nodded, couldn't speak, didn't have energy for words. The mission was complete. The target was eliminated. And Carlos Hathcock had just done something that military tacticians would study for the next 50 years. He had infiltrated 1,500 yards through enemy territory, taken a shot from between 2 machine gun emplacements, exfiltrated successfully, all without being detected. 7 days, lone in enemy-controlled terrain. It was impossible, but he had done it anyway. Historical note, the 7-day crawl has been verified by multiple witnesses, including Carlos's spotter and Captain Land. The technique has been taught at Scout Sniper School ever since as an example of extreme infiltration capability. Modern snipers study the mission as a masterclass in patience and fieldcraft. However, the mission's strategic impact remains classified. Whether the target was actually killed and whether the target was indeed a general remains unconfirmed by historical records. Carlos Hathcock returned to Hill 55 in late 1967. His first tour was ending. The confirmed kill count stood at 86. 13 months of constant operations, constant danger. Living under a $30,000 bounty, the white feather back in his hat after the general mission. The legend fully formed. The most feared sniper in Vietnam was going home. Carlos Hathcock returned to the United States in late 1967. 86 confirmed kills behind him. 13 months in hell. The Marine Corps gave him 30 days leave. He flew home to Virginia. Joe met him at the airport with their son. The boy was walking now, talking, growing up fast. Too fast. Carlos had missed so much. The reunion should have been joyful. It was awkward instead. Carlos didn't know how to be a civilian anymore. Didn't know how to be a husband. Didn't know how to be a father. He sat in his own living room feeling like a stranger. Joe tried to talk to him. He answered in monosyllables. She asked about Vietnam. He said nothing. How could he explain Apache? How could he describe the Cobra? How could he tell her about the 7-day crawl? She wouldn't understand, couldn't understand, so he said nothing. Night brought nightmares. Carlos woke up sweating, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Joe woke beside him, asked if he was okay. He said yes. But he wasn't. The weight of 86 faces pressed down on him. The faces in his scope. the faces he had ended. They were all there in the darkness, waiting. 1 week at home felt longer than 13 months in Vietnam. On the 8th day, Carlos drove to a Marine Corps recruiting office. Re-enlisted. Didn't discuss it with Joe first. Just did it. Came home and told her. She cried. Why, she asked. Why go back? You did your part. You came home. We need you here. Carlos couldn't explain. How do you tell your wife that war makes more sense than peace, that danger feels safer than comfort, that you don't know how to be normal anymore? You don't. So he just said the Marines needed him. It was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that Carlos Hathcock had become a weapon, and weapons belonged on the battlefield, not in living rooms. He deployed for his second tour in 1969, this time as a platoon commander, training new snipers, passing along everything he had learned, the patience, the stalking, the bubble, the mental discipline. His students respected him. Some feared him, and all wanted to learn from the legend, the man with 86 confirmed kills from his first tour, the man who wore the white feather, the man who had done impossible things and lived to teach about them. Carlos found purpose in teaching, found satisfaction in passing knowledge to the next generation. Every sniper he trained well was a sniper who would survive, who would protect other Marines, who would save American lives. The legacy would continue. The skills would persist. Even after Carlos was gone, these techniques would remain. That mattered. That meant something. During his second tour, Carlos would add 7 more confirmed kills to his total, bringing the final count to 93, each one verified, each one documented, each one adding to the weight he carried. But teaching gave him purpose. Training gave him meaning. The white feather remained in his hat. The legend continued to grow. Then came September 16, 1969. September 16, 1969 started as a routine day. Carlos was riding in an LVTP-5 amphibious assault vehicle along Highway 1. 7 other Marines were aboard. Standard convoy movement. North of landing zone Baldy. Hot day. Boring mission. The kind of mission where you let your mind wander. Think about home. Think about your next leave. Think about anything except the present moment. The mine contained 500 pounds of explosives. An anti-tank mine. Buried in the road. Pressure detonated. The LVTP-5 weighed over 37,000 pounds fully loaded. When the front wheel hit the trigger, 500 pounds of high explosive detonated directly under the crew compartment. The blast lifted the entire vehicle off the ground. Flames erupted instantly. Gasoline from ruptured fuel tanks ignited. The interior became an oven. Carlos was thrown against the bulkhead. His head struck metal. Everything went white, then black. Then he opened his eyes in hell. Fire everywhere, smoke choking thick, heat beyond description. Screaming, men burning. Carlos's training took over. Get out, get to the exit, move. Now he crawled toward light, toward air, toward escape. His hands touched the door frame. He pulled himself up, started to climb out. Then he stopped, looked back. 7 Marines still inside, burning, dying, screaming. Carlos's hands were on the exit. Safety was 3 feet away. He could leave right now, save himself. No one would blame him. The vehicle was a death trap. Staying meant burning, maybe dying. Carlos went back inside. The next 5 minutes would define him more than any shot he ever made. More than Apache, more than the Cobra, more than the General, more than all 93 confirmed kills combined. Because this wasn't killing. This was saving, and it cost him everything. He grabbed the first Marine, unconscious, dragged him to the door, threw him out. Someone outside caught him. Carlos turned back. The second Marine was screaming, leg trapped under wreckage. Carlos pulled. The man screamed louder. Metal bent, leg came free. Carlos pushed him toward the door. Someone pulled him out. Third Marine, already badly burned, not moving. Might be dead already. Carlos didn't know, didn't have time to check. Picked him up, carried him to the door, passed him to waiting hands outside. Carlos's own uniform was on fire now. He could feel it, smell it, the synthetic fabric melting into his skin, his face burning, his arms burning, his legs burning. The pain was absolute. Total, beyond anything he had ever imagined. But 7 Marines had been inside. He had gotten 3 out, 4 more remained. He went back. 4th Marine, 5th, 6th, 7th, each one a blur of pain and determination. Each one requiring him to go deeper into the flames, to stay longer, to expose himself to more heat, more fire, more damage. His body was shutting down, shock trying to take over. But he wouldn't let it. Not yet. Not until every Marine was out. The last man cleared the door. Someone grabbed Carlos, pulled him away from the vehicle, dunked him in a water barrel. The sudden cold on burned skin was agony. Carlos screamed, couldn't help it. The pain was too much, too intense. He collapsed, blacked out. He woke up on USS under repose. Hospital ship. Medical personnel working on him, cutting away his uniform. What remained of it? The fabric had melted into his skin. Removing it meant removing skin too. Carlos screamed. They gave him morphine. It didn't help much. The pain was beyond morphine's ability to control. 40% of his body was covered in burns. Face, arms, legs. 2nd degree in some places. 3rd degree in others. Full thickness burns where all layers of skin were destroyed. Down to muscle. Down to bone and spots. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Carlos didn't feel lucky. He felt like he was still burning. The recovery took months. Skin grafts, infection battles, excruciating pain, physical therapy, learning to move again, learning to use his hands. His right arm would never fully recover. Limited mobility, permanent weakness. His legs scarred. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. But all 7 Marines survived. All 7 lived because Carlos Hathcock ran back into a burning vehicle 6 times after he had already escaped. All 7 went home to their families. All 7 lived full lives, had children, grandchildren, careers, retirements, everything. Because one Marine refused to leave them behind. The Marine Corps recommended Carlos for the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration, the ultimate recognition of valor. Carlos refused it. I didn't do anything special, he said from his hospital bed. That's what you do for Marines. That's just being a Marine. Anyone would have done it. The officers insisted. Carlos, you ran into a burning vehicle while you were on fire. You saved 7 lives. That's Medal of Honor worthy. No, Sir, Carlos replied. That's not medal worthy. That's just the right thing to do. He would not budge, would not accept. The refusal stood for 30 years. Not until 1996, when Carlos was in a wheelchair and barely able to stand, did he finally accept a Silver Star. Not the Medal of Honor, a Silver Star. His son, Carlos III, now a Marine gunnery sergeant himself, helped his father stand during the ceremony. Carlos could barely remain upright, but he accepted the medal, not for himself, for the Marines who didn't come home. Carlos Norman Hathcock was 27 years old when the mine exploded. His combat career ended that day. The best sniper in the Marine Corps would never fire a shot in anger again. But his legacy was just beginning. The Marine Corps sent Carlos to Quantico, Virginia after his recovery. His body was broken, but his knowledge was priceless. Everything he had learned, every technique, every innovation, every lesson from Arkansas woods and Vietnamese jungles. It needed to be preserved, taught, passed forward. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School was established formally in 1970. Carlos was assigned as primary instructor. His classroom was a simple building on the Quantico base. His students were Marines selected for sniper training, young men who wanted to learn from the legend, who wanted to hear the stories, who wanted to understand how one man could do impossible things. Carlos taught them everything. The patience learned in poverty, the discipline learned in hunger, the focus learned in competition, the integration with environment learned in Vietnam. He taught them how to stalk, how to camouflage, how to move through terrain without being detected, how to read wind, how to judge distance, how to make the shot that counted. But more importantly, he taught them ethics. 1 shot, 1 kill. Not because it sounded good, but because it minimized suffering. A precise shot meant instant death. No pain, no prolonged agony. That was mercy within the context of war. That mattered. He taught them that every enemy was human, had a family, had hopes, had dreams. You might have to kill them, but you never forgot they were people. You never enjoyed it. You never glorified it. You did your job. You protected Marines, but you never became a monster in the process. Students who passed through Carlos's instruction went on to serve in every conflict that followed. Lebanon, Grenada, Panama, the Gulf War, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, decades of conflict, generations of snipers, all carrying forward the techniques Carlos Hathcock had developed and refined, all understanding that they were part of a legacy, a tradition, a standard of excellence. The physical pain from the burns never fully healed. Carlos lived with it constantly. Every movement reminded him of the fire. Every mirror showed him the scars. But he endured, pushed through, kept teaching. The Marines needed this knowledge. That was enough. That had to be enough. Then in 1975, new symptoms appeared. Muscle weakness, tremors, loss of coordination. The doctors ran tests, multiple tests. The diagnosis came back: multiple sclerosis, an autoimmune disease where the body attacks its own nervous system. Progressive, incurable, eventually fatal. The cause was unknown. Could be genetic, could be environmental, could be related to Agent Orange exposure during his extensive operations in Vietnamese jungles. Could be random chance. Nobody knew. There was no way to know. It didn't matter anyway. The disease was there. The progression was beginning. Nothing would stop it. Carlos continued teaching, despite the pain, despite the weakness, despite the tremors that made his hands shake. He adapted, found ways to demonstrate techniques even as his body failed, used assistance when necessary, kept going. Because Marines needed this training, Marines needed to learn these skills. That was more important than his comfort, more important than his pride, more important than anything. By 1979, Carlos could barely walk, used a wheelchair frequently. The tremors were constant. His speech sometimes slurred. The disease was advancing faster than doctors had hoped. On a spring day at the rifle range, Carlos collapsed during instruction. Unconscious. Ambulance called. Emergency room, both arms numb, left foot paralyzed. The Marine Corps had no choice. Medical discharge. After 19 years, 9 months and 5 days of service, 55 days short of 20 years. 20 years would have qualified him for regular retirement. Medical discharge gave him full disability benefits, which were actually better financially. But Carlos didn't care about the money. He cared about the timing. 55 days short. It felt like being kicked out, like the Marine Corps was saying he wasn't good enough anymore. Wasn't worth keeping. The depression that followed was total. Carlos sat in his wheelchair at home, said nothing, did nothing, stared at walls. Joe tried to reach him, tried to help, but he was gone, lost inside himself. The man who had crawled through enemy territory for 7 days couldn't find the strength to get through 1 day of civilian life. The man who had faced the Cobra at 60 yards couldn't face the mirror. The man who had saved 7 Marines from fire couldn't save himself from despair. Joe reached her breaking point. "Carlos," she said one evening, "I can't do this anymore. I've stood by you through Vietnam, through the burns, through the disease, but I can't watch you give up. I can't watch you quit. Either you find a reason to keep living or I'm leaving." The threat shocked him, made him see what he had become, made him realize he was losing the one person who had never abandoned him. His Joe, his wife, his partner through everything. He was losing her, not to the war, not to the disease, to his own surrender. A friend took him fishing, deep sea, sharks. The trip saved his life, literally saved his life, because fishing required patience, required reading water and wind, required studying patterns, required sudden decisive action when the shark struck. It was hunting again. The same skills, the same discipline, the same focus, but without killing humans. Just fish, just sport, just the pure expression of the hunt divorced from the violence of war. Carlos found peace on the water, found purpose in patience, found himself again. The depression lifted gradually. Joe saw the change, saw her husband returning. Not the same man who had gone to Vietnam. That man was gone forever, but someone new, someone who had survived everything and found a way to keep going. That was enough. That was more than enough. Historical note. Multiple sclerosis is a progressive disease with no cure. The exact cause remains unknown. Many Vietnam veterans who developed MS have questioned whether Agent Orange exposure contributed to their illness. No definitive link has been established. Carlos Hathcock never received confirmation one way or the other. The disease would eventually kill him. The honors accumulated through the 1980s and 90s. In 1986, author Charles Henderson published Marine Sniper 93 Confirmed Kills. The book became a bestseller, over 500,000 copies sold. Carlos cooperated with interviews, shared his stories, let Henderson document everything. Not because Carlos wanted fame, he never wanted fame, but because the stories mattered. They taught lessons. They honored the Marines who had served. They preserved history that might otherwise be lost. The Marine Corps established the Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock Award to recognize Marines who contributed to marksmanship training excellence. A sniper range at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina was named in his honor. The Carlos Hathcock Range Complex at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar became the training ground for West Coast snipers. Springfield Armory produced a limited edition, about 25 rifle called the White Feather, bearing Carlos's signature. Carlos became a living legend. Marines who had never met him knew his name, knew his story, knew about the White Feather and the impossible shots in the 7-day crawl. Young snipers studied his techniques. Police departments invited him to consult on precision shooting programs. The Navy's SEAL Team 6 sought his input on sniper training. Even in a wheelchair, even with hands that trembled, Carlos Hathcock remained relevant, remained influential, remained important. His retirement ceremony, held years after his medical discharge, included a plaque that captured everything. The plaque showed a bronze Marine campaign cover above a brass plate. The inscription read, "There have been many Marines, there have been many marksmen, but there has only been one sniper. Gunnery Sergeant Carlos N. Hathcock, one shot, one kill." The multiple sclerosis progressed relentlessly. By the mid-1990s, Carlos was confined to his wheelchair permanently, could barely stand even with assistance. His hands shook constantly, his speech slurred. The disease was winning, slowly, methodically, taking everything piece by piece. The man who had once crawled 1,500 yards couldn't walk 15 feet. The hands that had made impossible shots couldn't hold a rifle steady. The body that had survived fire and war and impossible missions was betraying him, and there was nothing he could do except endure. Joe cared for him through everything, fed him, bathed him, helped him dress, pushed his wheelchair, never complained, never showed frustration. She had promised to stay by his side. She kept that promise. Through Vietnam, through burns, through depression, through disease, through everything. She was there, always there. Carlos Norman Hathcock III visited regularly. He had followed his father into the Marine Corps, had become a gunnery sergeant himself, had served with honor. The pride Carlos felt was immense. His son had chosen the same path, had upheld the same standards, had earned the same rank. The legacy would continue, not just in technique, not just in doctrine, but in family, in blood, in name. On February 22, 1999 in Virginia Beach, Virginia, Carlos Norman Hathcock II died from complications related to multiple sclerosis. He was 56 years old. His wife Jo held his hand as he passed. His son Carlos was there. The disease that had stalked him for 24 years had finally won. The enemy that couldn't be shot, couldn't be outmaneuvered, couldn't be defeated. It had taken him piece by piece until nothing remained except memory. They buried him at Woodlawn Memorial Gardens in Norfolk, Virginia. Full military honors. Marines in dress blues, 21 gun salute. Taps played as the flag was folded. Joe accepted the flag, held it close, placed a white feather on the coffin before it was lowered into the ground. The symbol that had defined him, the challenge he had worn openly, the mark of the legend. It went with him into the earth. The Stevens Model 15. Rifle, the cheap .22 caliber single shot that Carlos had learned to shoot with as a hungry boy in Arkansas, was donated to the National Museum of the Marine Corps at Quantico by his brother Billy Jack. It sits in a display case today. Most visitors walk past without stopping. The rifle doesn't look special, doesn't look historic, doesn't look like it changed anything. But in Carlos Hathcock's hands, that unremarkable rifle became the foundation of a legend. Every skill, every technique, every impossible achievement, all of it started with a boy and his grandmother's rifle and the need to not miss because missing meant hunger. Josephine Hathcock outlived her husband by 17 years. She never remarried, never stopped loving him, died in 2016 at age 74. They buried her beside Carlos. Together again, together forever. The legacy Carlos Hathcock left behind extends far beyond 93 confirmed kills. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School he helped establish continues training America's finest precision marksmen. His methods are still taught, his patience is still emphasized, his ethics are still required. Graduates of the school deploy to every conflict, carry his techniques forward, honor his memory through their actions. The 50 caliber sniper rifle, which Carlos proved viable with his improvised M2 Browning experiment, has become standard equipment in military forces worldwide. Barrett, Macmillan, Accuracy International. Every modern 50 caliber sniper rifle traces its lineage back to Carlos's innovation, back to his willingness to try something impossible, back to his understanding that range and power could overcome conventional limitations. The shot through the scope has been analyzed by firearms experts and ballistics specialists. The probability has been calculated, the physics examined. The conclusion is always the same. It should have been impossible. The margin for error was too small, the variables too many. But it happened. The evidence was documented. The Cobra died with Carlos's bullet through his scope and into his brain. Impossible became possible because Carlos Hathcock refused to accept limitations. The 7-day crawl has been studied at military academies and special operations schools. The technique has been refined and taught, but no one has replicated the mission. No one has crawled 1,500 yards through enemy territory, taken a shot from between machine gun emplacements, and exfiltrated successfully. Carlos did it once, in 1967. With equipment and training far inferior to what modern snipers possess. He did it through patience, through discipline, through becoming part of the environment. The 7 Marines he saved from the burning vehicle all lived full lives, had families, had careers, had grandchildren, all because one man ran back into fire 6 times after he had already escaped. All because one man valued their lives more than his own safety. All because Carlos Hathcock understood that being a Marine meant never leaving anyone behind, no matter the cost, no matter the pain, no matter what it took. Carlos once said, "I never enjoyed killing anybody. It's my job. If I don't get those bastards, then they're going to kill a lot of these kids dressed up like Marines. That's how I sleep at night." He saw himself not as a killer, but as a protector. Every enemy he eliminated was one who wouldn't kill Americans. Every shot was one less threat to Marines who trusted him to keep them safe. The weight of 93 kills never left him. He carried those faces, those distances, those moments, but he also knew he had saved lives, had prevented casualties, had brought Marines home to their families. That balance was how he endured, how he justified, how he lived with what he had done. The white feather became his symbol, his challenge, his defiance. It represented courage, skill, sacrifice. Today, it represents something more. It represents the idea that one person can make a difference, that individual excellence matters, that precision and discipline and patience can overcome overwhelming odds, that a farm boy from Arkansas who learned to shoot because his family would starve can become the most feared sniper in Vietnam, can survive impossible missions, can teach generations of Marines, can change how America fights wars. Carlos Norman Hathcock II learned to shoot with 3 bullets at a time. He became a Marine because he wanted to be the best. He went to Vietnam because it was his duty. He killed 93 confirmed enemies because everyone he stopped was one who wouldn't kill Americans. He saved 7 Marines from fire because that's what Marines do. He trained hundreds of snipers because his knowledge could save thousands of lives. He lived with multiple sclerosis with the same patience he showed in Arkansas woods and Vietnamese jungles. Because Carlos Hathcock was never about glory, never about fame, never about recognition. He was about duty, about precision. about protecting the kids dressed up like Marines. There have been many Marines, there have been many marksmen, but there has only been one sniper, one shot, one kill, one legend. Carlos Norman Hathcock II, 1942 to 1999, the white feather, forever.